Em 5 segundos, mais uma transmissão de conhecimento do Centro Universitário Internacional Uninter.
Olá, saudações a todos os nossos
Hello.
estudantes, os nossos convidados e todos
Greetings
os que
to our
estão nos
students, our
acompanhando
guests, and
no
everybody
link do
who
YouTube,
is
que não
following
são
us in our
necessariamente,
YouTube
necessariamente
link
nossos estudantes, mas que
that are
usam a
not
gente
necessarily our
nessa noite de hoje.
students,
Agradeço
but
a
they are
presença, a
our
participação de todos
audience
e todas
this
e
evening. So
sejam
thank you for your
bem-vindos à abertura
participation
do segundo
and
Congresso
welcome to
Híbrido
the
Conectando
second
Teoria e
hybrid
Prática Docente
conference
e
connecting theory
a
and
semana acadêmica
practice
dos
in
cursos
a
da área de
fourth
Línguas e
academic
Sociedades, Letras, Língua
course in the
Portuguesa,
areas of
Letras
education and society,
Brasileiras e História.
English,
Nessa noite especial,
Portuguese,
nós teremos a
Brazilian Sign
palestra da
Language,
Imagine
and
the
history.
Future of Learning
In
with
this,
AI and
we're going to have
Interactivity,
talk about
Capital
Imagine the
Markets,
Future,
que será conduzida
studies
pelo
in
palestrante
AI,
professor David
that will
Grauner.
be led by
Antes de
our
nós
speaker,
iniciarmos, é
Professor
importante
David
nós
Graunik.
agradecermos a todos que estão
Before
nos
we start,
assistindo, que estão
I'd
dispostos
like
a
to invite
debater conosco esse tema
everybody
tão importante.
who are
Agradeço também
ready
a
here
todos os
today. I'd
colegas
like
da
to
Uninter
thank
que
you
fizeram
all
esse evento
for our
possível, o
Uninter
nosso reitor,
colleagues that
a
made
direção da ESELV,
this
a
event
coordenação da área
possible.
de línguas e
The
sociedade, a
coordination
equipe dos
of
estúdios,
language
a
and
equipe de marketing
society,
e todos
our
os professores e colegas
study team,
envolvidos.
marketing team,
Antes
and
de
everybody
iniciarmos as
involved
discussões
in this
acadêmicas
conference.
da
Before we
noite,
start the
gostaríamos de
academic
abrir a
discussion, I'd like
palavra
to
para
open
a
the floor
coordenadora
to
da área
the
de línguas e
coordinator of the
sociedade, a
Language and
professora doutora
Society
Crisbele Jamile
seat,
Domingues.
Professor
Antes de passar
Frisbali Jamili Domingues.
a
Before
palavra para
passing the
a doutora
floor
Crisbele,
to
uma breve
her,
apresentação da professora.
like to
A professora
introduce her
Crisbele Jamile
briefly.
Domingues é coordenadora
She is the
da nossa
coordinator
área
of our
do Centro
department
Universitário
of
Internacional
the
Uninter. É
Uninter
doutora e mestre em
International
estudos linguísticos pelo
University Center.
FRL,
She
com
has a
ênfase em
PhD
pragmática e
in
ciências
languages with
cognitivas.
an emphasis in
É especialista
pragmatics
em
and
formação docente
cognitive
para
science.
EAD
She's an
e em
expert
ensino
for
de língua
uh,
espanhola e graduada em
remote
letras
distance and
pela UFT.
Spanish
Atua em grupos de
teachings.
pesquisa nacionais,
She
foi membro
works
da diretoria
as
da
part
ABRAP
of
e
research team. She
desenvolve
was a member
investigações
of the ABRAP and
transdisciplinares nas
developed
áreas de tecnologia
transdisciplinary
educacional,
research
comunicação,
in
cognição e neurociência.
technologic
Professora doutora
education,
Crisbele,
cognition, and
seja muito
neuroscience.
bem-vinda
So
ao seu
welcome,
evento.
Professor Cruz Belli, to our event.
Professora, aqui o seu microfone está mutado.
Professor, you are on mute.
Agora vocês me ouvem?
Can you hear me now?
Sim,
Olá,
agora sim.
boa
Yes.
noite, professora
Hello, good
Michele, a
evening,
nossa
Professor
comissão
Michelle,
organizadora do
our
evento que está aqui,
the
e os
organizer of this
ouvintes
event.
também,
I'd
a
like to thank
Tânia
you,
e o Everton,
Tanya and
nossos
Everton,
intérpretes de
our
Libras,
sign
junto com a
language
Priscila
interpreters, together with
Molina,
Priscilla
que será
Molina,
aqui
who
a
is
nossa
going to be
tradutora, atuando
our,
como
English
na
interpreter.
tradução simultânea desta palestra de abertura de hoje.
And
Então, é com grande
so
alegria
it's with a
que
great
damos início
pleasure
ao
that
segundo
we
congresso
start the
híbrido
second
Conectando
hybrid
Teoria
conference
e Prática
connecting theory
Presencial
and
em
practice
conjunto com, a
together
quarta semana
with the
acadêmica da
fourth
área de
academic
Línguas e
week
Sociedade,
in
que é um
the
verdadeiro
Department of Languages
ecossistema
and
de
Society, which is
conhecimento que integra a
actually an
quarta semana
ecosystem that
acadêmica de Letras,
integrates
Língua
the
Portuguesa,
fourth
Letras
academic
Inglês,
week of
Letras
Portuguese,
Libras e História.
English,
Então, este encontro é
Brazilian Sign
mais
Language, and
que um
history.
evento para nós,
This
é um
is more than
espaço
an
de
event.
diálogo
This is
e
a space
troca
of
que gera
dialogue and
reflexão
exchange,
coletiva. Ao longo
building
desses dias, teremos
together
palestras,
these
mesas redondas,
fields. Throughout
oficinas
these days,
e
we're going to have
apresentações de
um,
trabalhos de nossos estudantes em
speakers,
coautoria com
lectures,
os nossos professores,
roundtables,
promovendo essa
and
integração
workshops,
entre teoria e
promoting the
prática
integration
e
between
entre
theory and
saberes
practice and
locais e
between
perspectivas
local
globais.
knowledge
O
and global
tema
perspective. The
deste ano
topic of
nas nossas
this year's
semanas acadêmicas
conference
é
in our academic weeks
internacionalização.
is
Então, por isso, nós
internationalization,
estamos
and that's
honrados
why
com a
it's an
presença de
honor to
convidados
have
internacionais,
such
vindo de
international
países como
uh,
Estados Unidos,
guests
Canadá e
from the
Portugal, que
US,
certamente
Canada, and
enriquecerão
Portugal,
aqui as
who's
nossas
going to make
reflexões
our
e
reflection
debates.
even
Quero expressar
more
um agradecimento
expressive. I
muito
like
especial aos
also
nossos
to thank
estudantes que estão
our
aqui
students who
nos
are here
assistindo de
today
todos
watching
esses
us,
cursos
from
são a
all
razão,
these
claro, de tudo
courses
isso
that are the
acontecer,
reason
aos
why it's
professores
happening
pelo
today,
empenho,
to our
dedicação e serem
professors for
cientistas curiosos e que estão
their
conosco aqui
work and
nesta noite
dedication
de hoje,
and for
e
being
aos
such curious
convidados por
scientists, and
aceitarem
to our
o
guests
desafio de
who
compartilhar suas
accepted this
experiências
challenge
conosco, com a
of
nossa área,
sharing
com a
their
Uninter, e nesse grande
experience with our
congresso que
department,
está
with
aí para
UNINTER,
todos os
in such a,
estudantes
a,
da
a
Escola de
nice conference.
Educação
And the School of
Superior, Humanidades
Education,
e Línguas, liderado
Humanities
pela
and
professora
Languages, led by
Dinamara
Professor
Pereira Machado,
Dinamara
dando
Pereira
um grande
Machado,
abraço.
who
Sem o
is sending
esforço de cada esse
her
congresso
greetings.
não seria
Without the
possível.
effort of
Então,
all
que
of
seja
you, this conference
momento de
wouldn't be
aprendizado,
possible.
de
So we
inspiração
hope
e
that
conexão.
it's
Então,
going to
sejam
be a
todos
time of
muito
learning,
bem-vindos.
inspiration.
Aproveitem ao
Welcome to all
máximo
of
esta
you.
oportunidade. E
Enjoy this
agradeço mais uma
opportunity to be
vez ao
here. And
professor
again,
David
thanks to
Guralnick,
our
da Columbia
to Professor
University,
David
também
Gornick
ao
from Columbia
professor
University,
Dr. Luiz Miguel
Professor
Repaz, da
Dr.
Universidade de
Miguel
Coimbra,
Repaz from the
Reparo, da
University of
Universidade de Coimbra, em
Coimbra
Portugal, e
in
também ao
Portugal,
professor
and also
Fabiano
Professor
Bertolucci,
Fabiano Bertolucci,
que é de uma
who
universidade do
is
Canadá.
from
Nós teremos também
A
aqui a
Canadian university.
presença
We're going to
da
have here
professora
also the presence
Giovânia
of
Maria dos
Professor
Santos, que
Giovanna
vem
Maria
da
dos Santos
Universidade de São
from the
Tomé e
University
Príncipe.
of
Então,
Santo Tomé
nós
Principe,
teremos falas de
and we are going to
diversos
have
cantos do
lectures
mundo,
from
de
different
diversos
parts of the
espaços, de
world, different
diversas
spaces,
universidades
different
aqui, em
universities,
conjunto com os nossos professores,
together
para os
with
nossos
our local
estudantes e
professors
aí
to
também
our
para o nosso
students, and
congresso.
again,
Mais uma vez,
to
muito
our
obrigada, que
conference.
tenhamos
Once more,
todos
thank you
uma
so
noite
much,
muito
and let's
proveitosa.
have a very profitable evening.
Muito obrigada, professora
Thank you
Crisbelli.
so
Antes de
much,
nós fazermos a
Professor Crisbelli.
apresentação do
Before
palestrante dessa
introducing
noite,
our
quero
lecturer
apenas
today, I would like
repassar a nossa
to
programação da noite para aqueles que
again
estão nos
go
acompanhando
over
pelo
our
YouTube, para que
program for
possam
those
depois
who are on
serem
YouTube so
encaminhados
that
aos links, né, da programação de
they
hoje.
can be
Nós
shared to
teremos
the
até
links
às
of our
19
program
horas a
today.
palestra com o
Till
PhD David Graunik e
7 p.m.,
teremos
you're going to
a partir
have
das
our lecture
19h10
with David
mesas
Gronick. From
redondas dedicadas
7 to 10, you're
especificamente
going
aos
to
cursos da
have
área.
a
A
round
nossa
table
primeira mesa
dedicated to
redonda
special
dedicada ao
courses. The
curso de
first one
Letras
is
Libras,
for
que é
the
sobre a atuação da
Brazilian Sign
Federação
Language with
Internacional do
the
Âmbito
work
Brasileiro.
of the
Vai ser
Brazilian
conduzido pelo professor
Federation that's
Antônio
going to be
Abreu.
led
A
by
nossa
Professor
segunda
Antonio Abreu.
mesa é o ensino
Our
de
second
português para
roundtable is the
estrangeiros em São Tomé
Portuguese
e Príncipe, e é
teachings
uma mesa
for
dedicada ao
foreigners in
curso
São
de
Tomé
Letras Língua
Príncipe,
Portuguesa,
and it's
que é conduzido
dedicated
pela professora
to
doutora
the
Giovânia Perim dos
Portuguese
Santos.
language.
Nossa
It's going to
terceira
be
mesa
led by
redonda da
Dr.
noite é a mesa
Professor
Cosmos da
Giovanna, and then
Aprendizagem
you're
em
going to have
Língua,
the final
Música e
roundtable, the Cosmos
Evidências, mesa
and
dedicada
language learnings
exclusivamente ao curso de
exclusively
Letras em Inglês e
for
conduzida
the
pelo
English
professor
language course, and going to be
André
led
Hedlund.
by
A quarta
Andrea
mesa da
Hedlund.
noite é
The fourth
História e Novas
roundtable is
Tecnologias,
history
dedicada ao
and new
curso de História,
technologies
será
to
conduzida pelo professor
the
Darius
course
Roth.
of history.
Passarei agora a uma breve
Now I'm going to
apresentação do nosso
going to
palestrante da
introduce
noite, o
our
professor PhD David
lecturer
Graunik.
today,
O
Professor
professor
David
tem
Gronick.
o
Uh,
nível, o
he
certificado PhD
has
ou
he's
PhD.
a
Ele é
PhD
presidente e CEO da
professor. He's the
Kaleidoscope
president and
Learning
CEO of
e professor
Kaleidoscope
adjunto da
Learning
Columbia
and
University. O professor David vai
assistant
discutir
professor at
conosco
Columbia
hoje o uso
University.
de
He's going to
inteligência
discuss with us the
artificial e
use of
outras
artificial
tecnologias
intelligence and
para
other
nos ajudar
technologies
a
to
reimaginar
help
o
us to
futuro de
reimagine the
experiências
future of
que, em suas próprias
experiences,
palavras,
what,
nos ajuda a
in his
criar
own words, help us
experiências
to
de aprendizagem
create
personalizadas,
uh,
autênticas e
uh,
significativas.
tailor-made
Então,
learnings,
Professor
authentic
David
and
Graunik,
significant. So,
thank you very
Professor
much
David,
for
thank you.
being here with us. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation. If you would like to start a little bit earlier, we are ready for you. If you need some time to get ready, that is not a problem. We can continue talking about the program of our event for this evening and also for tomorrow.
Okay, I'm happy to start. I think I need to get my video enabled, so let me do that.
All right.
Thanks. If it works for your audience, I'm happy to go ahead and start. So thanks
Perfect.
for inviting me and having me, and for switching to English at the end, so I knew what to do. I heard my name a couple times. So okay, so should I? And in terms of end time, we're still looking at 7 o'clock, I guess, 7 p.m. for you.
Feel free if you need to finish a couple of minutes earlier, no problem at all.
Okay. Okay, fantastic. Okay, well, let me share my screen and I'm happy to get started. So thanks again for having me here. I'm really looking forward to this. Okay. All right. So you should see my screen. Everything's set. So let me get started.
Everything's fine.
So fantastic. Thank you. So yeah, thanks to everyone for coming. I'm David Goralnik from New York, from Kaleidoscope Learning, which works in the for-profit world, and from Columbia University, both here in New York. And so I'm going to talk about the future of what learning can be using AI and new technologies. So first, that gives you a little bit of background about me. And so just to give you a little bit of sort of some things to know about me, my view of learning experience design, using technology especially, is very much holistic. It draws on work from education, from cognitive science, from computer science and AI, and from motivational theory, among others. And I have a strong view of creativity being an important part of the work that we do. So I look at education as being not just about information and facts, but or even about skills, though it's very much about skills, but about picking from different fields, creating a learning experience that's going to really resonate with people and help them learn whatever it is they need to learn to be able to do, among other things. My background includes a lot of work in professional development and corporate learning, as well as higher education. So my company, Kaleidoscope Learning, creates online learning experiences primarily for organizations. So everything from customer service for retail representatives at a Target store, a big retail in the US, to legal education for lawyers as part of their continuing training, to sales training, anything and everything over the years, I think, in the corporate and professional world. I also teach at Columbia University, where I teach an annual course on online learning design for the workplace, and also supervise master's students and spend some time on PhD committees and chair a master's concentration in online learning for the workplace. So a few different roles, all of which kind of go together. A little bit more about me. A lot of the work that I've been involved with has been for very large scale audiences. So one of the goals that I'm typically concerned with is to put people in positions to learn and succeed when they don't have access to a teacher or professor. Now, that said, a lot of the self-paced learning experiences that I've designed, or that our teams here have designed, could be stronger if they do include interactions with a teacher or professor. So I'm going to show you a couple of examples that don't have a person with them, but would be stronger if that's possible. Sometimes it's just not possible from a practical standpoint. And a lot of these could also work well in concert with instructor-led discussions. So even some of the things that we've done for big companies in the US, Target stores, customer service, they would work with simulated customers in an online learning program where the customers would come up in video and then spend a little bit of time with their supervisors talking about it. And so that would be a way to balance the time of everybody. So lots of things to talk about. So I want to talk a little bit first about what a potential future learning experience might look like. And this one is in the student world rather than the corporate world. And what we have here is a student who is in his room, and he is interested in learning about ancient Greece. And the way he's going to do that is he's going to click a button and project on his wall ancient Greece. All right, so he's in this imaginary future world. Some of these things are more possible than others right now, as you'll see. And so he might ask, is that the Acropolis? Well, who's he asking? He has an AI tutor, an AI coach. So the coach is there with him and says, yes, it is. Actually, there were a number of buildings known as Anacropolis in ancient Greece. The word Acropolis means the highest point, but the Acropolis in Athens, which you recognized, is the famous one. So that's what he knows here. So that's pretty good. So he has the coach with him. He could communicate by text or by voice, and she could communicate, back the same way, or by video if we wanted to see her. So a couple different things going on here. He then may ask, did the Acropolis always look the same over the years? So again, he's asking this in this simulated magical world that's projected into his room. And she says, well, we don't know much about the architectural appearance of the Acropolis before the Archaic era, which started in the 8th century BC. And so she talks about when Pesistratus built an entry gate. All right, so she says, take a look. So she's directing the conversation a little bit more here. All right, so she shows what this gate looks like. And then he may wonder who was Pesistratus? You just mentioned this person. And she says, well, he was the ruler of ancient Athens during most of the time from 561 BC to 527 BC, and he was the son of Hippocrates. So we're getting some information, and he looks like something like this picture here, the statue that we see. And then the student says, well, the Acropolis is so much bigger than I imagined. So he's just sort of making a comment here. He might also leave the virtual world. So here he was. All of this has happened in the virtual world, hasn't left his room. But he might visit Greece today, and you can imagine a world in which the AI coach is with him and some peers are with him too, and he's communicating with people as he's taking an actual tour. So, on the actual site. So there's a lot of different possibilities. There are a lot of different possibilities for this kind of model. So let's talk about some of the themes of the experience that we just saw part of. This is experiential learning in a very realistic context. Now, he wasn't learning by doing something practical, right? So he wasn't practicing being the mayor of Athens in modern times or ancient times, but he was experiencing something. He wasn't just reading a book. He was actually doing something, exploring, taking a lot of initiative, thinking a lot about what was going on. And he had coaching guidance. That's where the AI coach was especially helpful. She was there to guide him, also there to answer his questions. He also had feedback. So he got feedback from the coach. In this case, he didn't do anything that really required the kind of feedback we sometimes get in learning experiences. And that's also, it's in my next demo, what that would look like in a different setting. But he got feedback. He could get feedback from the coach. So, she's not telling him you're doing this well or not well. She's there more as an advisor. This is a more open-ended kind of activity, but it doesn't have to be. Also could be some feedback from peers in that last slide that I showed where they're in the modern world, maybe doing some things together. There's a lot of learner control. The learner had a tremendous amount of say over how the experience unfolded. He asked questions. He was able to kind of take the conversation in different directions, but he was assisted and advised. So, we're not expecting he's coming in knowing about ancient Greece. He's interested in exploring. He might know a lot already. He might know nothing already. It's up to the coach to try to work that out. So the coach was there when he needed the coach. There were a few things that she pointed out very specifically that would be of interest maybe to him. And there was a lot of control on the learner's part in terms of what he saw and did. So overall, this was an immersive, personalized experience and could be a lot more learn by doing oriented, as my next demo will be. So, he could have been asked to be the mayor. He could have had a simulated conversation with Socrates. I mean, any of these things become possible in the virtual world that we're living in. So really a lot we could do with this kind of experience. So our student here is also a trainee in this world. So he is also working a retail job. And his training experience here he is in a training room, though this could also happen at home. It doesn't really have to be in the training room. But for these purposes, he's in the training room. And instead of having a class where he's sitting and taking some notes and memorizing facts, he clicks a button and he has a retail store. And his job is to provide customer service, and he's learning how to be a customer service representative. And in order to do that at this retail store, he's learning by practicing and by doing. So he looks at all these people and he gets to approach a customer who looks like they might need help. And so he does that. And so we zoom in on this customer and he says, hello, can I help you find anything? And then the AI coach jumps in and says, well, make sure you smile and look friendly. So in this model, she's also monitoring through some sensors what his facial expressions are. So he kind of said the right thing, but he didn't necessarily look the right way, and she picked up on that. So this is a case where the coach jumped in and intervened and interrupted to make a comment from a coaching standpoint. All right, so again, let's try this again. Can I help you find anything? She says, yes, do you have this in a size small? He says, I'm sure we do. Let me check for you. And so it goes on and on. I'm going to jump to the end. This conversation could go on for quite some time, but just to jump to the end of what one interaction would be like, the AI coach says, hey, you did great, but you need to work a bit more on your facial expressions. And then there are some scores. So my view of scores is always a little bit mixed. I think it's very easy for scores to then kind of take away the nuance of the feedback, right? So if you kind of get really see this here in the US, people get focused on the score, right? Do I get 95 or 96 or 97? And the feedback is, hey, you get this number, and then it's kind of hard to get nuanced feedback about what the real strengths and weaknesses were. And even if you did really well, maybe there's some things you could have done a little bit better, or some interesting areas to follow up on. And with technology, I think there's the potential to do more of that. It requires keeping track of a lot of data and knowing a lot about someone, which has some kind of concerns too. But there's really a lot we can do. But in this particular case, especially, really like the idea of having scores in sub areas, especially because each of these areas reflects something real, right? So if you're going to be good at customer service, you're good in these areas. So these are very real and realistic scores. So wording, about 95 out of 100. A tone, he got an 85. Facial expressions, only a 60, as we saw. That wasn't his strength. And overall customer satisfaction, a 70. That's actually kind of interesting too, because he was so good relatively at everything else. But having, the lesson there as well, if your facial expressions aren't as friendly as they should be, then her overall impression of you isn't that great, even though you kind of said the right thing and said it in a pretty good way and, got her what she needed. So interesting thing there. So let's talk a little bit more about this experience. And this was experiential learning in a very realistic context. And he really was learning by doing, right? So the idea here is that the interaction that he had with this customer, and again, this is not quite the real world, but is the future that's getting closer and closer. He had a very realistic experience, just like talking to a real customer. Along with that is learning by doing. He really was doing the job, which we know from research results in skill transfer to the actual job. Okay, so, you may be a great test taker. You may be able to remember all the principles of customer service and what you should do in a situation, and even, write the right answer, pick the right choice, and seem to do very well, but maybe you can't do it when you get on the job. And here, we're a lot closer to seeing, he's in a very realistic environment, emotionally, in all ways. And so if he's doing well in this training, he's probably going to be able to transfer to the job really, really well. We had coaching guidance. So the coach was there. In this case, he didn't ask a lot of questions, but he could have. We showed a more active learner here. He was much more, it's kind of a different kind of conversation than he had in Greece. But here he was, the coach was there to provide guidance and the feedback. So we saw feedback from the coach. We also could have seen feedback from peers. So this was one that I set up as a model that's self-paced, but that we could do this as a cohort with peers weighing into, or they could watch videos of their own each person's interaction and critique them. There's a whole host of things you can do depending on time, depending on the availability of instructors in whatever form they are outside the technology. One of my favorite aspects of this is the performance-based assessment, that, it's realistic. He's evaluated on the real things you need to be good at in order to do this job well. So that's what he's evaluated on. And to me, it's a critical part of what it means to be, to be a successful learning experience. He's not just good at taking tests, he's good at doing the actual things that he has to do on the actual job. Learner control. Again, so he had some say. He picked which customer to focus on, but he's also assisted and advised. So the coach might suggest the next customer that he works on, maybe to practice his facial expressions more. There may be times that he's more directed or less directed. Depends on his preferences, depends on, how this coach knows him and reads him and sees what works for him. And overall, this is an immersive, personalized experience, once again, something that feels real, it feels meaningful, and you're really into it. You're just focused entirely on this experience. So where does AI come in this model? It comes in a few different ways. One is that the coach, I've said, is an AI coach, and she's interacting realistically in audio or text or potentially video with the learner. We also are tracking learner performance in detail and providing intelligent analysis. So, we theoretically, since this is a semi-imaginary future, but there's a lot of data that we can track, and we could build a lot of this where we're tracking his strengths and weaknesses based on the decisions that he made and the things that he did. This can be used in an adaptive way to determine future learning. So it might be, if he's having trouble with facial expressions, give him some more situations where that's going to matter. It could be a lot more nuanced than that in terms of what he should practice on next, and also on how we assess him. Also can incorporate learner preferences in terms of interaction style. Does he want to just jump right in and find a customer to help, or does he want to ask the coach for some more help? The coach can be very responsive to what he's interested in terms of his style of interaction. Content can be up to the coach in some ways. So maybe that he's interested in sports, so you give him a customer in the sporting goods department instead of a customer in the clothing department. All of these things can matter and can affect how people learn and feel about the experience and eventually how they perform. Let's talk about something else for a second, take a step back now that we've seen kind of a couple of possible envisionments of what the future could look like in both the sort of more, the education world and the corporate world. In my classes and seminars, I often ask people what their best learning experiences ever were. What was the best learning experience you've ever had in your life? Doesn't have to be in a formal learning setting. Could be anything, anywhere in your life. Learning happens everywhere. And so here are a few of the responses. So this woman, actually wasn't this exact woman, but the person did look like her. This woman said her best learning experience ever was when her sister taught her how to drive a car. This person learned how to crochet from her aunt. This guy played soccer, as we call it in the US, with a great coach and great teammates, and really enjoyed the experience when he was a kid. When I ask this question, it's always interesting to me that very few relatively of the best experiences people can remember come from formal education. And almost none ever really come from workplace learning, from corporate education. So there's really something to be said there. There's a lot in the way that people learn and enjoy learning that we haven't necessarily captured in modern education for a variety of reasons. So let me talk a little bit about why that is. But first I want to go back one more going back to early education and training. So the early days, back to ancient Babylon, which we see here. Apprenticeships were the way that you learned. Okay, you would learn by working with a master. So you might learn to be a blacksmith, where you're learning from a master craftsman. You would start by watching. You might get to clean a little bit first and kind of get familiar with the tools. Then maybe you could hold the poker in the fire. Then you could get a little bit more experienced. You would do more. You would take on more and more. I got to experiment a little bit just last week. I was in Prague to give another talk, and they took me to a glass making facility, which is very, very well known there. And I got to do a little bit, but I was very new. So they didn't ask me to clean, but they did, I pretty much did small pieces of it. I blew into the glass, but somebody else was really monitoring the process. An expert was monitoring the process. I helped shape the glass, but they told me what to do. But you get better and better. You have to start somewhere, and you would learn by doing. So apprenticeships are really, really a great model. They have been for years. So, what's so great about it? Well, it's a learn by doing approach. You learn by really practicing. You're not just memorizing, you're practicing and doing. And you had a coach. You had an experienced mentor. Somebody there with you working with you, watching you, helping you, getting to know you, strengths and weaknesses and your interests. So it was a very personalized process. Okay? The apprentice wasn't stuck in a class where everyone has to do something in lockstep, but they really had a personalized approach. And these also weren't just a one-time event. You would work regularly with the master. You didn't just go in and take one class. You didn't go in and have one-day seminar and move on, but you would often work with and consult with the master over a long period of time. So why don't we see more of these? This is such a good model. We see it sometimes today, but why don't we see more? And it's just too impractical and expensive. Experts are expensive. They're in short supply. We have lots of people who need teaching and who need training. Experts have to do their jobs. They just, they have to produce. More and more there's pressure. And there are just so many people. Since we reached a point where we needed mass education, we have had so many people. And that's kind of the origin of the classroom model that we typically see. It was because there's so many people who need to be taught or who need to be trained. Not because it's the best way to learn, but because it's the only practical way to learn in that world. But with technology, it isn't. So this is also a time-consuming model for the experts. It's a great model. The issue is it just doesn't scale up. Okay, so when we have lots of people, we can't quite do that. But with technology and with AI, we can. We can create great learning experiences at scale. So we can take a lot of the theory behind progressive learning, project-based learning, learning by doing, all these wonderful things that you really want to do, but you just can't always afford to do. But if we use technology in the right ways, as we saw in the demos from the beginning, we can. It's not everything. It's not going to be as great as you have this wonderful relationship with a person and they work with you, but it's going to be really, really pretty good and reach millions of people. So, if we have an expert, they can handle, 1, 2 people at a time. I was very fortunate as a kid. I went to a really progressive elementary school where we had a lot of the things that I believe in and have believed in ever since. We had project-based learning. We had individualized projects. We had teachers who worked kind of as coaches and mentors. But the classes were very small. You had 12, 15 people in a class, and that was the most that they could handle. This is on a large scale. So we can do this kind of thing, have the AI coach on a large scale, and then also free up the time of the teachers when you have them, or the experts when you have them, to do only, to do a smaller piece and therefore reach more people. I'll talk about another theme, the theme of design. So when I say the word design, a lot of times people think we're talking about graphics and the look and feel of something. And to me, that's not what design really, really means. Design is really about the overall experience. And it starts with the goals and the audience. What do you want people to be able to do when they're done with this experience? And who are they? How do we go about this in a way that works for this audience in the way that they need things to be done? What's going to meet them where they are? So here's a story that kind of illustrates a little bit of this. Way back in 2002, a small company, not small, but called iRiver, created this little thing, which was an early MP3 player. And so at the time, for those of you who were not around during those days, at the time, we had albums, we had cassettes, then we had CDs, and we didn't have that much in the way of portable music very easily. So, there were portable cassette players, but those were kind of big. CDs weren't really all that portable at all, except maybe in your car. And MP3s came out, and you have digital music. This is fantastic, right? So you have this little MP3 player, and it was really kind of a nice little gadget. You could put music on it, and that was pretty cool at the time. Now, the way you put music on this was fairly complicated. You would first have to find the music. So you either would take your own CDs and turn them into MP3 files by a process called ripping. So you had to get some software that would do that. Or you would find some files online, but there were only illegal files at this point. So you couldn't really do that legally. And you would risk, if you were willing to take that risk of being illegal, which I was not, you also would be at risk of, getting computer viruses. Who knew what you were going to do? So this was complicated. Get the files. And then once you had the files at all, you named them something that would be maybe kind of memorable so you would know what song it was. And then you plug in this little device to your PC, and it only worked on a PC. And you would copy the files, basically functioned as an external hard drive. So you would copy the files over, and then when you went for a run, which was really nice for, you could listen to the files pretty much in order. So this was, I used this a little bit personally, but this was really for people who were early adopters of technology. This was not something that everybody was going to want or feel comfortable with. The process I just described, and I don't think I even included all the steps, was complicated. It was technical. It wasn't particularly pleasant, really. It was, a very strange, convoluted process. And then later that same year, Apple came out with the first iPod. And so this was, before there were iPhones, there was the iPod. So it played music. And it looked nice and, it was comfortable to hold and beautiful, and everybody really liked it for that reason. But a lot of why it became so popular, in my opinion, is that the experience worked. To put music on this, Apple invented the iTunes store, and you would go buy a song for 99 cents, which is a pretty manageable price for a lot of people. You'd buy the song, you download it, and then to get it on this machine, you would plug this machine into your computer, and it would automatically sync. And it would just put up a little dialogue, say, okay, syncing your music, please wait. It would be done. And then you'd have everything. And you had some other nice things, playlists and some things. But really, the whole process was so well designed. I think that accounts for why this was such a much more popular device. And so at one detailed technical level, well, they're both MP3 players. But the experience wasn't the same. And the design of the experience wasn't the same. Relating to that, every time we have new technologies, we have new methods of interaction. And we can do different things. So there's a tendency, especially in education, to when we have new technologies, to want to do only the same thing. So, we have an in-person class becomes a Zoom class. And there are obviously advantages to that too. I'm not saying we would never want to do that. But there's a lot more we can do with technology, and a lot more we can do that's different because the new technology allows us to do different things. So, go back to the old days, we had radio. Radio had sound. Okay? It was, pretty cool. And then there was TV. All right. With TV, you had picture, but you weren't just going to have a radio show with picture. You had seen movies, so people knew a little bit what to do, but you could do different things. You can have characters talking. You can have different kinds of visuals. You're not just replicating a radio program on TV. I mean, sometimes, but mostly not. Then at some point, we had the VCR, the video cassette recorder. So now you could record TV. So, back before then, if you wanted to watch a television show, you had to watch when it was on. So, show's on at 8 o'clock on Thursday night, you turn your TV on at 8 o'clock on Thursday night. And if you miss it, if you're not home, or your TV isn't working, or something, but if you're not around, you just miss it. If you have other plans, hope you catch the show some other time. With the VCR, you could time shift. You could record this and watch it another time. You could play shift. So you could bring it to a friend's house. It also changed the way that you could interact with the show. So you could start to interact with it a little bit. You couldn't affect how the show played out, but you could pause, you could fast forward, you could rewind. All of this started to change the way that people watch. And the logical evolution of that is the way people watch today, where things are streamed. And because of technology, you can do different things, but the things people produce are different. They'll produce shows and release a whole lot of them at once, and you can binge watch them. All sorts of things you can do with technology that are different from what you could do before. Every time there's a new technology, there's something new we can do with it. Video games have different controllers, so you could do different things, different ways to interact. Computers, certainly different ways to interact. The early computers, you could just type, then graphical interfaces and the mouse, and laptops that were portable and mobile, and phones and tablets that were even more mobile. Every time we have new technology, we can do different things. So I saw some of the early online learning experiences in companies were on phones were very much the same as they had on desktop computers. And that just didn't really work at all because the screens were smaller. So you were kind of taking a learning experience that was maybe pretty good online, but it just, on a computer, but it just didn't translate to condensing it on a smaller machine. But more than that, you're missing out on what the machines can do. You have something that's mobile. So maybe instead of having a training course, you want something that people can look up just in time answers to what they need. So, my company at one point, we built something for maintenance technicians that would help them when they're on the job you're repairing an air conditioner, and you can look up, you're running into a problem you haven't seen, you can look up how to solve that problem. It kind of walked you through like, well, what are you seeing? And here are some solutions, and here's some videos of similar situations that might be helpful. Here's something about that model if you know. And, people use Google for that too. And some of these things were in the early days where Google wasn't as helpful. But some of this is also very specific to the field and well structured so people can easily find what they want. With new technologies, you can do different things. You don't necessarily do the same things. These days, we have all kinds of new technologies. We have virtual reality, which to me is great for simulations. So, you look at the customer projected on the wall, which is probably a little bit too much ahead of the times right now, the customer that we saw early on, but customers in virtual reality, not necessarily. That's something we can do or come a lot closer to my vision with virtual reality. Augmented reality, where you are somewhere, you're looking at real life, but you're adding to the real life. So you might have a map where it shows you where you are and more than you knew. So, where's the nearest hotel? Give me some information about this building. You could have a personal tour of something. You could walk around a city you didn't know and learn more. Okay, so if I had the right app when I was walking around Prague last week, I might have been able to learn more about the different buildings that I was seeing that I wouldn't get from just being there on my own, or I wouldn't get without a guide with me. Lots you can do with holograms, 3D projections, and that's getting closer to being more realistic. There's a company I've worked with it's based in Italy in the US, where they do called eRail, and they do some really interesting simulations that are projected. So they do some medical simulations where you can kind of interact to a degree with a simulated person. It's really, really interesting. AI has all kinds of uses, and I think the focus out of what we generally see is a lot of talk about how AI fits into traditional higher education. And that's definitely, a topic of conversation. But to me, there's also so much more. So the coach that we saw early on is an AI coach. The uses we can have for AI in terms of the learning experiences we can create, really, really, a whole different world out there. A lot we can do. So many more with different technologies, smartwatches, Amazon Alexa, 5G networks are, very prevalent now. So people have fast connections, a lot of places. Bendable and foldable screens are slower to be, to catch on than I had hoped. I do have a foldable phone, but those aren't as ubiquitous as I thought they would be just yet. And then the last one is kind of a headset that kind of tracks your brain waves and lets you communicate with a computer that way, which I think is an interesting idea and maybe a little strange. I have kind of mixed feelings about that one, but these are different ways to interact, and we could have different experiences that way. One more phase of this talk. We'll still have some time left. AI has, a long history in education and training, and I want to talk a little bit about that, some of which involves me personally as well. This first one does not. So in 1966, Joseph Weizenbaum invented something called an ELIZA, which he called ELIZA, and it was an online therapist. So this was a program that you interacted with in text, and it looked like this. So this is from Wikipedia, their example from ELIZA. So it was a mock therapist where you would type and it would type back to you, and it would act like your therapist. So this is, it's all credited here what this implementation is, but the ELIZA may, ask you a question, is something troubling you? You might have an opinion about that. You might say what's troubling you. ELIZA will go on and ask questions. This felt very realistic to people, kind of in the way that a lot of the chatbots do today. This ELIZA was really cool and really groundbreaking. It didn't really understand anything at all. It would mostly ask a lot of questions so that it felt real but didn't have to know much. It would spit back some of the keywords that you said. It had, it knew some things about what was going on, but really didn't have a model of the world. It was able to just mostly continue the conversation in a realistic way. And that's why, and Weizenbaum chose therapy, and it worked that way. But it's really fascinating. It was considered groundbreaking and looks almost familiar in these days in a funny way. It's from 1966. Intelligent tutoring systems in the 1970s. You would have systems that would help people solve problems, maybe in math, that would be kind of like the, early version of the AI coach that I showed. So, some text-based interactions. Also, the 70s expert systems, mostly in the medical field, where they would help people make decisions and solve problems. So, again, early use of AI in learning and performance. 1991, we started to have training simulations using AI, and some of this is where it's personal for me. This is something that I worked on in 1991 that was considered the first corporate training simulation. So I'm going to show you one more demo. This is a real one. This really was done. This was done in 1991. This was for Boston Chicken, which was a sort of a high-end fast food restaurant chain that later became Boston Market and now has gone out of business after a pretty good run of 35 years or so. Went out of business fairly recently. So they were called Boston Chicken. It was for their cashiers. So the idea was to train their cashiers on how to ring up orders on their cash register quickly and accurately. So that was the goal of this system. So I'm going to show you a little bit about how this worked. On the right-hand side is what their cash register looked like. It looked exactly like this. So it's a lot of keys. You think, how hard is this to do? But it wasn't that easy to do this well, and especially to do it quickly and accurately. So you see at the top left, you have goals, the performance meters, speed and accuracy, and those are going to track your performance the entire way. So what I have to do is a customer comes up to me, and so she comes up in video, and she's got this tray, and she kind of reminds me what it is. It's a half chicken with tortellini salad, fruit salad, an extra cornbread, and a small Diet Coke. All right, so there's a lot of stuff. The system helps me a little bit with that. On the left is what the system is doing. It's kind of all the the educational environment. And so I have 3 questions at the bottom: now, what, how, and why. And those are questions I can ask of an online, not exactly online, but a tutor. So I may ask, now what? Okay, and I ask now what, and the tutor says, well, you need to ring up the customer's order. Okay, I should know that. That's why I'm here. So how do I do that? And it says, well, to do that, first I should click the 1/2 with sides key, which is flashing now. So it's flashing, and you see the key flashing on the keyboard. All right, it's flashing. So I'm going to click that key. Well, but first I want to know why. Why is it the 1/2 with sides key? And that's the most efficient way to ring up this order. So it turns out that that's, there is a half chicken key. There's a key for each of the sides, tortellini salad. But, I need to use one key. That's the efficient way. So 1/2 with sides. All right, so I do that. It rings it up on the cash register. I would go through this and finish the entire experience. Everything behaves realistically. The tutor is there to interrupt me if I do something that's incorrect and to help me correct it. So if something, needs to be voided out, it'll help me, force me to do that and guide me through it. And at the end, I have hopefully a happy customer. So this is a very realistic learn by doing simulation. Guidance and feedback from the tutor. The performance meters at a game-like feel that maintains the realism of the task. So I'm always getting evaluated on speed and accuracy. And so it feels like a game. Like you want to get 100% on speed and 100% accuracy. But they're real. They are authentic, real evaluations of how you would do in real life. Right? So they're the same metrics. It's not a game that's there just to be a game. It's a game that is authentic. It's realistic. And that makes all the difference in the world. The challenge aspect also really worked. Like people really wanted to do well on this. They wanted to be prepared for the job. Sure, they wanted to be able to be, comfortable handling real customers, but they also want to get, a lot of people want to get a really good score. Guidance and feedback components used AI techniques. So that's kind of more about that. So jumping ahead to today, we have LLMs and generative AI. Kind of since 2023, I think, when we kind of started to see it breaking through. So I want to talk a little bit before I wrap up about LLMs and symbolic AI and more. So symbolic AI uses data and rules. For example, the Boston Chicken simulation had rules for different situations based on what the learner was doing. So this had, we call a world model of what it meant to be an effective cashier in lots of different situations. It's traditionally been very labor intensive to create these systems and still is using symbolic AI. Somebody has to think through the content, and a lot of that was me back in those days. Somebody has to define the structures, define the rules. But on this approach, it's going to be correct. I mean, if I get the rules and the data right, it's going to be correct. Okay? It's not, there isn't really a chance it could be incorrect unless the rules are incorrect. It's as good as what I gave it, but it's if I have those right, it's right. And we always know why it does what it does. There's no mystery. So that's the advantage to this approach. LLMs are very, very different. Okay, so they're machine learning systems that are trained on very large sets of data. So they learn from the data they have. They're based on the concepts of neural networks, which is based on the idea of trying to mimic the human brain. And I think a lot of you've seen, they make use of tokens. So words, parts of words, characters, same with images and videos. Generative AI systems such as ChatGPT function by learning patterns and being able to generate text by predicting the next token in the sequence. Okay, so it kind of knows what should be the right thing to say. They can produce very realistic interactions and often very correct interactions, but they can make mistakes. They can make errors. They can hallucinate. And in my view, and this was not just me, they don't really reason. There's no underlying reasoning world model. That's probably why you're going to see LLMs sometimes do things that are miraculously amazing and sometimes say things that are just wrong. You ask it to, it was a famous example that was flowing around the internet. I think it was, how many instances of the letter S are there in Massachusetts? And in reality, there are 4. And it would say there were 6 or something like that. It would get it wrong, and kind of take a while to understand why. And because it wasn't really able to count, it was able to see, was able to look at the data that it had. And these, in the best case, are only as accurate as the data they have, and we don't know where all that data came from. Right? So there's a lot of training. So it's an interesting model. I would love to see at some point a combination of the two techniques, and that's still kind of complicated technically and still being worked out, how LLMs and symbolic AI could work together, training the LLM, maybe using a symbolic approach for certain things, so we could build the right learning experiences that would be, much less likely to be wrong or hallucinate, and would have an underlying model and would recognize some of the things that, they don't recognize now when they're not correct. So where do we go from here? A lot of this to me is about taking progressive learning theory, as I said before, and building it into modern technology. There's a famous academic article by John Seely Brown and Alan Collins and Paul DeGuide from 1989 on authentic activities in situated learning, that you learn in context, and that you learn best from actual, authentic, realistic activities. And a lot of that underlies, the much of the theory that we have. I mean, learning by doing goes all the way back to John Dewey. It goes years and years back, or back to apprenticeships. All of these are very effective ways for people to learn and perform. And technology can help us build the right experiences to let people do that on a large scale. So to me, key themes involve fostering critical thinking and decision-making skills, not just memorizing information, but really putting people in position to have to make good decisions and be able to think thoughtfully and critically, especially in these days of all kinds of things out there on the internet, to be able to sift through what you see and read. Technology that feels warm and personal. Okay? Technology can still feel cold. It can feel as if it's trying too hard. So to have technology that really feels like it's an experience that you can relate to and feels natural. It's not trying to be a person where it's clearly not a person, but it's also not asking you to jump through a lot of hoops and feel distant. It's a lot more than just the technology behind a good technological experience. And to me, AI can be used in different ways, both within a traditional class structure and outside of that structure. A couple more points about AI and new technologies and how we can use them in learning. We can use AI in lots of different ways to help create more humanizing learning experiences if we do it the right way. So again, designing the right types of experiences, designing something like the Apple iPod, and designing things like the experiences that we saw here that really put people in a position where they have, agency and that things are meaningful and relevant and they can learn things in their own, way to a large degree. AI and new technologies can help us create individualized, engaging, relevant, and respectful learning experiences that are scalable. Again, coming back to the scaling up point. If we build the right systems, we can roll them out to millions of people, not just, 1 or 10 or 15, like a class with a great professor. Which doesn't mean we don't want to have those. It just means that we want to augment those kinds of models with other things. And AI can play a key role in education and in work, but there's an art to using it well and to using it ethically. So a whole lot there. I want to close with a quote from Isaac Asimov, the famous US science fiction writer and thinker, really. This is a quote from 1983, published in a Canadian newspaper called The Star. In this, he predicted the world of 2019. I don't know why it was 2019, not 2020, but he predicted 2019. And he talked about the world of education, the way he envisioned it. Now we are aware that 2019 has passed. But his prediction was that education, which must be revolutionized, will be revolutionized by the computer. And there'll be an opportunity for every youngster and every person to learn what they need to learn in their own time, in their own way, their own speed. And education would become fun because it would bubble up from within and not be forced in from without. And that, I think, sums up a lot of my view about where education and technology go together, where technology and AI can and should, but absolutely can, help us create progressive learning experiences that meet these criteria, that put people in positions where things are meaningful and relevant and they're fun in the good ways. They're often challenging. They're often hard work. They're not all just fun and games. Sometimes they're fun and games. And we can build all kinds of different things. So on that, I'm going to wrap up. Thank you for your time. We'll have a couple minutes, I guess, for questions if there's a possibility. Thank you for your time. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, email other ways. You can see my book is out as well. See a little bit about my company and also the Learning Ideas Conference, which is a conference that we hold every year as a hybrid event in New York and also online, and has a bunch of spin-off events as well. So with all of that, thank you so much for your time today, and I'm really have enjoyed speaking to everyone. So thanks once again. I'm going to leave this up, and then I don't know, Michelle, if there are questions or if you want me to hang around for a few more minutes.
Thank you very much, Professor David. We unfortunately only have 2 minutes, and the topic is so broad, right? But we do have a question. If you feel like there is a clear-cut answer for that. Our student Eric Figueiredo, he asks, how can we guarantee that the use of AI in education is a means to potentialize or to make critical thinking more powerful for students, and not only a means to automatize answers and reinforce technological dependence?
No, that's a great question, and I wish I had an answer that would guarantee that, and I do not have an answer that will guarantee that. But I think one of the things we just want to do is to keep continuing on in creating learning experiences of the kinds that are going to make the most sense, right? The kinds that I'm talking about here. And I think the more of those that we have, the more that people can see what AI can do and start to appreciate it. I think there's always going to be a faction that, especially in the workplace world, that wants simply to, use AI to evaluate you and to take it on. But the more we can do that, the more we can create, these kinds of really engaging and immersive learning experiences and make those standardized, institutionalized, the more we can have AI's use go in the right direction. And it's an incredibly challenging time, I think, in the world these days, in all ways relating to lots of things, especially including AI in education. So it's a great question, and I wish there were an easy answer, but I think following these principles will really take us in that direction and help us get to hopefully where we want to go.
Thank you again very much, Professor David. Thank you very much for your availability and for responding so quickly to our invitation. It was a pleasure to have you here. And I hope we can have you here more often in other events, for other talks. Thank you very much. Obrigada, professora Crisbelli. Obrigada a todos os nossos estudantes que estiveram aqui presentes com a gente, a nossa audiência no YouTube, ainda que não
All
sejam
the
todos
students who were here with us, our YouTube audiences, we thank you so much for your participation, and we wish you an excellent end of event this evening. So thank you so much, David.
Thank you.